to read to you the passages for Ready Lesson 8. The first passage is Rushmore by Mark Santiago. This summer, my parents planned a trip for us to visit Mount Rushmore. Our sixth grade class had studied Mount Rushmore, and a visit there sounded really boring. Last summer, we went to a theme park, and I went on about 50 rides. Now, I was supposed to enjoy staring at a huge carved rock. As we drove to the airport, I prepared myself for the boredom that I would have to endure over the next week. A few hours later, we landed in Rapid City, and we spent the afternoon driving through a wildlife park where we saw all kinds of amazing creatures. I was starting to think that this trip might not be a huge waste of time after all. Here the author is giving clues about the theme by showing how the main character changes. So I underlined these sentences. Seeing the animals was fascinating, but nothing could prepare me for what we saw the next day. We drove about 30 miles to Mount Rushmore. I knew that Mount Rushmore was a mountain with the faces of the presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln carved into its side. I've seen statues of famous people before. I didn't know why these would be any different, but boy, did I find out. So again, I'm underlining the sentence because it's not quite so boring for him anymore. When I saw the monument for the first time, I felt frozen in my tracks. Mount Rushmore is simply majestic. The size of the carvings is astonishing. Each head is about 60 feet high. I never thought anything could top the theme park adventure I had last year, but now I know that sometimes a big rock can actually take my breath away. So he definitely changed from looking at this as this would be a boring trip to being very excited about what he was seeing. Vivian's move is the next passage that you're going to read and answer questions. On a gray, rainy morning, Vivian waved goodbye to the red door she had walked through for the last time. She waved goodbye to her bus stop, which looked lonely in the rain. She waved goodbye to her favorite bakery, the grocery store, and the neighborhood softball field, which was a swirl of cold brown mud. She waved goodbye to the frozen Charles River, and a tear fell down her face as she watched Boston vanish in the rearview mirror of the truck they had rented to move their lives across the country. So here we find out that Vivian is moving, and she's sad about it. Vivian had known for over 6 months that she was going to move to San Francisco, but she didn't want to believe it. Boston had been her home since she was born. It was all she knew, and she loved it. After all, Boston had the best Italian food, beautiful buildings, subways, and most importantly, her friends. What would she do in a new city without her friends? For the past couple of months, Vivian and her dad had been reading about San Francisco and California. He wanted her to be excited, but she didn't care that San Francisco was on a beautiful bay with scenic hills. She didn't care that the city was known for having some of the best food in the world. She didn't care about the spectacular Golden Gate Bridge in the warmer winters. Boston was beautiful, and it had wonderful restaurants, and she adored the fall leaves and the snowy winters. Vivian and her dad took 2.5 weeks to drive to San Francisco. By the time they crossed the California state line, they had driven through 12 states, 4 mountain ranges, 3 national parks, and countless cities and towns. Vivian felt exhausted from the long trip, and now she had to face the reality of why she was on the trip in the first place. California was her new home. So far we see that she's not excited about moving to California. The book that said San Francisco is hilly was right. Vivian thought that hilly was an understatement. She felt like she was on a roller coaster as they drove through the steep hills of the city. She thought it was too bad that San Francisco didn't get snow like Boston does. These hills would be amazing for sledding. On the other hand, she thought about how much more fun the double-seated bike that she and her dad rode around Boston would be on these hills, at least going down. So she's trying to look on the bright side. After driving around for a while, Vivian's dad stopped the truck at the top of a hill in front of a house with a pink door, and her dad wasn't particularly excited about the bubblegum-colored entrance, but Vivian was thrilled. The red door on their house in Boston suddenly didn't feel so far away. She ran through the door, up the stairs, and into the second room on the right, just like her dad had explained. This was her room, and it was perfect. It had blue walls, a slanted ceiling, and a circle window that looked out on the street. The movers already had set up her bed in the room. San Francisco was starting to feel more like home every minute. Vivian and her dad left their new house after several hours of unpacking to find somewhere to eat dinner. They found themselves in a part of town called North Beach. Vivian smiled when she saw restaurants with names like Mamma Mia or Mangia Bene and red, white, and green flags hanging in the windows. She was delighted to smell the delicious aromas floating in the air. She recognized that this was the Italian section of town, and she couldn't believe how similar it was to the North End in Boston. Before going home, Vivian and her dad decided to take a trolley car to a nearby beach. They wanted to watch the sunset on their first day in San Francisco. When Vivian stepped off the trolley, she saw the waves lapping onto the beach in front of the silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge. She wondered if it were possible for San Francisco to be as wonderful as Boston. So far, San Francisco was pretty great. She let out a sigh as she watched the sun turn colors and fade away. She thought about how her friends in Boston were probably asleep, and she wondered what new friends she would meet in San Francisco. There's a time difference in San Francisco and Boston, and that's why she thought they may still be asleep. All right, have fun answering the questions about Vivian's move and how she changed from the beginning of the story of really dreading going to San Francisco to the end of the story to where she's actually excited about it and it wasn't as bad as she thought it would be.